Good Shabbos, everybody. Thank you so much for the warm welcome back. Believe it or not, it's good to be back. We did have a great time. Difficult getting Gabby set up, but it's all done, and she's now in her new environment. Seems happy, I guess. But I was going to actually talk about that today because Elizabeth and I enjoyed going to the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue La Shabbat in Amsterdam, built in the mid-1600s, and their very unique way of operating, their unique nusach, their unique style, certainly an eye-opener, although I've been there before, their formality, it was wonderful. And generally give you sort of an overview about things that came to mind. And that was my intention this morning, but I have to tell you that I cannot get out of my mind, of course, the scenes, the pictures, the video streams of the devastation that has occurred in Turkey and in Syria. It started coming over the screens. We picked it up, obviously, in Amsterdam. We couldn't tear ourselves away from it. And what I think is also so infuriating is listening to some of what I call the pietists, right and left, and their stupid comments, or what I consider to be stupid. And so I want to talk about it a little bit this morning, because I know people have a lot of questions. Where is God? How did God allow this to happen? It's not the first time. So I want to sort of try and address this morning. And to do so, I want to start off by taking you back to 2012. As you remember, the terrible earthquake in Haiti. We here at the congregation suffered a tragic loss when one of our young members, who was on a work contract, arrived on the last Air Canada flight into Port-au-Prince, went to his hotel, and was last seen checking into the hotel, and was never heard of again. You know, it took us 6 weeks to bring the body back once it was found. So it was very painful for all of us at that time. But what I want to do is I want to turn the attention to Pat Robertson. You remember Pat Robertson? Who remembers Pat Robertson? Okay, so Pat Robertson, the television minister who never passed up a chance to put his foot in his mouth, immediately declared that God caused the devastation in Haiti because many years ago Haiti had made a deal with the devil in order to achieve independence. Now, of course, it's very easy to dismiss Reverend Robertson's words, as most did at the time, including politicians who referred to them as being stupid. But the fact is, whenever a tragedy of this magnitude takes place, most thinking people wonder, did God cause this? It's a natural thought. How are we to understand this from a religious perspective? And the truth of the matter is that from a religious perspective, many religious thinkers can't help but believe that, yes, the all-powerful God is responsible for this devastation. It's all God's will. And every calamity that occurs on earth is the result of an expressed divine decision. And that God decides who shall survive and who shall not. Mi yichyeh u'mi yamut. We say it every year. Who will survive such a tragedy and who will not? And yes, when tragedy strikes, they will go further and say it's because of sin. You sinned. This is why God did this. Robertson at the time is not the only one who felt this way. Many rabbis did as well, as they do today. And the spokesman for a major ultra-Orthodox organization infers that these disasters come about because of lashon hara, evil speech. My question is, whose evil speech? Is it the evil speech directed against the ultra-Orthodox? Or perhaps the evil speech that comes from the ultra-Orthodox against everybody else? And either way, because of our evil speech, tens of thousands of Turks and Syrians had to die. This kind of thinking is nothing new. I could quote you a whole list of rabbis, some of them the great Gedolei Hador, the great giants, who have attributed everything from the disasters of the World Trade Center to New Orleans, to AIDS, to bus crashes, plane crashes, being the hand of God, punishing people for their sins. Now, if one accepts, as many do accept, that the hand of God is involved in everything that takes place in this world, then one has to accept that the devastation that occurred in Turkey and Syria is part of the divine plan. Now, having told you that, I want you to know categorically that I do not accept it and I do not believe it. Perhaps I did when I was a kid in yeshiva. You know, the Rebbe goes up, the Rebbe says so, you listen. But we grow up. On a simple level, if the earthquake this week in Turkey and Syria is God's divine punishment, then why are so many working so hard and giving so much money for the rescue effort? If this is what God wanted, wouldn't that be going against God by helping to ease the pain of these people? I guess this might explain why in the 1940s, when the Belzer Rebbe was asked to pray to God to stop the Holocaust, he refused. He refused. He said it was God's decree, and there's nothing that could be done to change that. And second, I would also point out, if the earthquake was because the people there had turned against God, or any of the hurricanes that have taken place, or any of the landslides, or any other of these things are because of sinfulness, as the late Rabbi Avadia Yosef, a leading Sephardic rabbi, maintained, then how would we explain the Lisbon earthquake? Does anybody know anything about the Lisbon earthquake? I see some people shaking their heads. The period of the Enlightenment in the 18th and 19th century was, in a sense, spurred by this question. When in 1755, a massive earthquake hit Lisbon, Portugal, destroying, by and large, many of the churches. And while Lisbon's priests attempted to salvage the crucifixes and the religious icons with which to ward off this catastrophe, it didn't help. Nearly 100,000 people were killed. And many in trying to flee the churches that they were in. What were they doing in the churches? Well, to top it all off, it occurred on All Saints' Day. And to add insult to injury, while most of the churches in Lisbon were destroyed, all the brothels in Lisbon were untouched and were open for business in their red light district. Business as usual. How could God allow that to happen? You should know that according to many, the great thinker Voltaire became an atheist after witnessing this. Which leads me to the third point. I reject this way of thinking because who on earth would want to believe in a God that does such things? We Jews speak of God as being compassionate and merciful. Were the innocent Turks and Syrians this past week so bad, so sinful, that even unborn babies had to be killed? What had they done? What had they done that was so bad? Israel is condemned for its response in Gaza as having been disproportionate. What should we say about God's vengeance in Turkey and Syria this week? I would call that highly disproportionate. Some years ago, many years ago, there was a very powerful Broadway show. It was called Agnes of God, where a court-appointed psychiatrist reveals to the Mother Superior why she abandoned her faith. As a young girl, her best friend had just died in a horrible car accident. The nun at the Catholic school explained why it happened. She didn't say her morning prayers that day, so God punished her. Instead of inculcating the desired devotion that would produce a lifelong devotee of prayer, the explanation created revulsion as well as abhorrence of God, who could be so cruel in response to a little girl's forgetfulness. The playwright had the good sense to make the Mother Superior respond, "What a stupid woman." And one more thing, one more reason why I reject the thinking that these disasters are God's punishment. I reject that way of thinking because Maimonides, Rambam, rejects that way of thinking. Maimonides makes this very clear in his famous Shemona Parakim, where he writes, the rabbis say, for example, the world follows its natural course. You will find that the sages always avoided attributing a time-related event to the divine will. And when they said that a person gets up and sits down in accordance with the will of Hashem, with the will of God, they meant that man's nature was such that he would always have free choice of getting up and sitting down. They did not mean that God's will, that God wills the moment when a person gets up or remains seated, any more than he determines at any given moment that a stone should fall to the ground. Maimonides here is teaching us an incredibly important lesson about life. What he's teaching us is that God created this world with its own natural laws, laws that have nothing to do with man's behavior. And the world follows these laws of nature. And so earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis are part of that nature. They are the checks and the balances of the universe to maintain its own balance. If there were not earthquakes to release the energy beneath the surface of the earth, the plates would ultimately destroy each other, causing far greater damage to the entire planet. Hundreds of small earthquakes occur daily around the world. And if humans were not living in the regions of these events, these natural corrections would silently keep the world intact with no trace of human casualty. However, the fact is that humans, not God, humans have populated the universe and live in areas where they are vulnerable to the powerful forces of nature. Turkey, if you've done your research, is no different. It's located on such a fault line which exists in the earth. The reason why those Turkish people and the head of the Jewish community and his wife were among them in one of the Turkish cities, I forget which one it was, they were found. Thank God their bodies were found and they'll be buried, but they were there. And the reason is because it's not because they sinned, but because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. The reason why the brothels of Lisbon survived when the churches collapsed wasn't because the brothels were built on stronger stones and the churches weren't. And the people in the churches happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But you know who was in the right place at the right time? And I was thinking about this last Shabbat when I was standing with Elizabeth at the shul in Amsterdam, because we read about it in last week's Torah portion. The Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, as they were preparing to cross the Red Sea, they were standing in the right place at the right time. There are scientists and archaeologists and religious thinkers who claim that there was no miracle at the splitting of the Red Sea, that such events were natural occurrences, similar to the earthquakes. that takes place from time to time, that the sea sort of splits itself. They just might be right. I don't know enough about that. It was a natural occurrence, okay, let's say it was a natural occurrence. But what made it miraculous was that it happened just at the moment when the Bnei Yisrael, when the children of Israel needed to escape from the Egyptians. The great Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, he understood all the Egyptian experience in this way. In his words, and I quote, "As we read the story of the Exodus from Egypt, we are impressed by the distinct tendency of the Bible to relate the events in natural terms. The frogs came out of the river when the Nile rose, and the wind brought the locust and split the sea. All archaeologists agree that the plagues depicted by the Bible are very close related to the geographical and climatic conditions that prevailed in Egypt. There's nothing unique about them. Behind the passages in the Bible, we may discern a distinct intention to describe the plagues as naturally as possible. The Bible never emphasizes the unnaturalness of the events. Only its intensity and its force is emphasized. Yes, my friends, God created this world and decreed that the world would follow its own laws of nature. And it's our challenge to use and harness nature for our own good. Now, this past week, and I know that you celebrated while I was not here last weekend, was Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of the month of Shvat. Tu B'Shvat, is never mentioned in the Bible. It's only mentioned in the Mishnah. That's the earliest time we have a reckoning of the age of trees. Many mitzvot that Jews performed in Israel depended on agricultural cycles. For example, the Jews are obligated to tithe 10% of their produce. What did that year mean when they had to tithe according to the year? It meant from one Tu B'Shvat to the next. Obviously, with the destruction of the temple and the exile from Israel, the meaning of Tu B'Shvat was lost of its relevance. Still, during the Middle Ages, the mystics seized upon the holiday from a very new perspective, even writing, as you had last Friday night, I believe, a special Seder for this day. For them, the concept of the trees was not looked upon as being something as an agricultural nature, but was looked upon more from the perspective of a cosmic tree life. Eitz Chaim, we just sang it together, which is so important in Kabbalistic thinking. In modern times, Tu B'Shvat took on renewed meaning with the re-establishment of the state of Israel and the return to the land. And this became a natural day to commit ourselves to planting trees. And it's regarding planting that our sages taught the most fundamental lesson in a relationship with the world. The Talmud tells us, and listen carefully, the Talmud tells us of a person who stole some wheat. Stole wheat. And what did he do with the wheat? He planted it. Planted the wheat. And in the words of the Talmud, din hu shelo tismach, which means, according to the law, it shouldn't grow because it was stolen. It shouldn't work in the ground. But what the Talmud tells us, and you should listen to this carefully, olam keminhago holech, which means nature follows its own course. Does that mean we shouldn't plant? Does that mean it is all hopeless? No. Of course we don't. We continue going, and we continue what we were doing even after tragedies occur. That's exactly what the Jews, as they came out of Egypt, as they stood by the water there, ready to cross, in last week's Shabbat Shirah. What did we read? We read that the sea was swirling around them and the Egyptians behind them. And what did they do? What did the children of Israel do? They cried out to God that where they're going to go, what they're going to do. They're going to drown. And you know what God said? God said to Moses, he says, Ma titzak elai. Why are you crying out to me? Daber b'nei Yisrael v'yisahu. Speak to the children of Israel and tell them to get moving. Don't just stand there. Tell the Jewish people to move. My friends, there is much that man can do to overcome nature. And we as Jews can take great pride in what the people of the state of Israel have done. Where nature made a desert, they made it bloom. And now, where nature made an earthquake that has devastated parts of Turkey, little tiny Israel was among the first to set up relief missions and be on their way to help. Little tiny Israel sent relief workers trained to remove bodies from collapsed buildings. While some Jews are very content and very proud at seeing that, like I was, many of them are not content with the attitude. They prefer the term Gott von helfen. You know? God will help. Some of the Haredi Jews, listen to this, some of the Haredi Jews, they don't believe in moving forward. It's much easier to sit back and not get involved. Because when you get involved, there is always a price to pay. And I remember very clearly a picture from the Haiti earthquake in 2012. It was in Israeli newspapers of some of these ultra-Orthodox volunteers who had gone to save lives. They were Haredim. And the picture showed them in the middle of the devastation. It was a Shabbat. And they were standing there davening. They made a minyan on the Shabbat in Haiti. That picture evoked protests from the right and from the left in Israel. From the right, some claim that Jews should not be violating Shabbat to save, and excuse me for saying this, but to save the Goyim. And from the left, there were protests about why did these Haredi Jews stop to pray when they could have been clearing out buildings? But there is one person that I read about who had no complaints about what the Jews of Israel had done. Her name was Goubilin Jean-Michel. She lived in Haiti. And 1 month early, because of the earthquake, her son was born. And where was he born? He was born in the Israeli field hospital that was set up in Port-au-Prince. And in the very Catholic country of Haiti, she named her baby Yisrael. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'yisahu. Speak to the children of Israel and let them go forward. We are those children of Israel. We believe in a compassionate, loving God. We also believe that He created a world that follows its own natural course. Finally, and most importantly, we believe that He created a world in which our mandate is letaken olam b'malchut Shaddai. Never forget those words. Not letaken olam, but letaken olam b'malchut Shaddai. To repair the world for God's kingdom. There was a fascinating article in the Wall Street Journal where the writer pointed out that the natural disasters from Lisbon to San Francisco have led to growth, development, and renewal throughout history. And that's because we didn't leave it to God. God von helfen doesn't work anymore. Man did his share. So let us now all do our share. We know that God will definitely do his. And we will see the fulfillment of the prophetic dream to a world in which no one shall hurt and none shall destroy. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.